As Andrew Lawrence of Media Matters put it perfectly, the woke mob is coming after Hitler. The day after General John Kelly's confirmation to The Atlantic that Trump personally said to him that he wanted generals like Hitler's generals, no Republican condemned Trump, and several, like Governor Sununu of New Hampshire, defended Trump in the same matter-of-fact condescending way the Germans and some Americans dismissed and defended Hitler literally a century ago. Well, he didn't really say it. And even if he did, he didn't really mean it. And even if he meant it, he really wouldn't try it. And even if he tried it, he really wouldn't get away with it. General Kelly needs to now hold a news conference, an open event, National Press Club in D.C. or wherever he can get a place cheap, and lay it all out on the record in front of the cameras and the microphones for an hour or 90 minutes, longer, if he can get others from the Trump reign of terror and error to join him there. And that is a possibility. Others. Selena Wong of ABC is quoting the former national security official Olivia Troy, who told her military leaders who have served in the Trump administration are weighing the following on whether to go on the record against Trump. Is it hurtful or helpful to the military, and does it politicize them even more? Troy also says these military leaders are naturally enough calculating the human equation. What risk does saying something put them at? What risk does it put their families at? And how much exponentially higher does that risk become if Trump wins anyway? No offense meant with this. We may have been fetishizing the military since 9/11, but no one will deny that its people have a different kind of courage than the rest of us do, and as a baseline, it is indelibly admirable. But the nation has never been at greater risk than it is right now. Never. Including the Civil War. And that is even clearer if we are just talking about the military. Because if Trump now wins, the military ceases to be what it has been since June 14th, 1775, when the Continental Army was founded. It was founded as a force to defend this land and its people and its freedoms from tyranny, not to become an instrument by which a scumbag like Trump and the horde of little scumbags around him can enforce tyranny against America and Americans. That is the choice, General. A free America, more or less, or an absolute dictatorship where you, sir, are expected to shoot Trump's American critics. Period. The more stars on a military man or woman's shoulders, the more you hear them talk about the privilege and responsibility of serving and defending this nation. Well, the price of the responsibility part has just come due, General Kelly. You had the guts to tell the Trump-Hitler story on the record finally, and the fascism part on audio finally, and the Republicans like Chris Sununu dismissed it, and you, as part of a political campaign and ultra-liberalism, and Sununu explained that we've all heard a lot of extreme things about Donald Trump and a lot of extreme things from Donald Trump, and it's kind of baked into the vote. And he says the polls show nobody cares, and not once did it ever seem to register with this idiot Sununu or the other Republicans who even referenced this yesterday, that we are not talking about a vote. We are talking about death camps. And Sununu is left almost literally explaining that it's just the woke mob coming for Hitler. And General, and to the military leader friends of Olivia Troy, if that doesn't get you to sit down at a dais at the National Press Club and do as much for this country as if you were personally subduing the 9/11 hijackers as they boarded the planes, maybe this from the dumbest man in America, Brian Kilmeade from Fox News, gradually building his rationalization to the point where he comes this close to saying that, yeah, maybe Trump shouldn't have mentioned Hitler, but it's not like he was wrong about Hitler, because certainly Hitler's generals did a lot of good things. Maybe this will get you onto that stage in front of those microphones, General.
It's not your job to rein in the president. It's your job to do what the president wants. And then you factor in the fact that he runs his own company, coming from the business world, the first one we've ever had. It's not even a public company. And then he obviously has frustration. And I could absolutely see him going out, you know what? It would be great to have German generals that actually do what we asked them to do, knowing that's a third, maybe not fully being cognizant of the third rail of German generals who are Nazis and whatever.
Great generals, bad boss. General Kelly, we are at an inflection point right now, as certainly as we were at Yorktown or Gettysburg or Normandy, except that with just words, you can prevent the bloodshed that will happen, not on one battlefield at home or abroad, but in every corner of this nation to some great degree or even just to some small degree, because bloodshed and the threat of it will be the essence of a Trump dictatorship. And bluntly, General, you helped get us here. Because while you were witnessing this madman in real time yearn for a military personally sworn to him as the Wermacht was to Hitler, you said nothing then. Well, now you are talking. And the test of your patriotism, to say nothing of the test of the chance for this nation to still exist 5 years from now in something like its current form, depends on you winning the battle of Trump. Because I don't know where you were on Saturday, October 20th, 1973. Your biography says you had gone into the reserves, so in your early 20s you could finish your degree at UMass Boston. So maybe you watched the Special Watergate Counsel Archibald Cox's press conference that afternoon at the National Press Club, where Cox spoke so modestly, so bluntly, so self-abnegatingly about the crimes of Richard Nixon, that he not only broke Nixon and precipitated Nixon's infamous Saturday Night Massacre, firing Cox, forcing the resignations of the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General hours later when they wouldn't fire Cox. Cox not only did that, but more importantly, his honesty, his patriotism was so obvious and unanswerable that when Nixon acted in a show of force that he was certain was going to win Watergate for him and make his opponents afraid of him, America instead sided with Archie Cox and the truth and the investigation, and Nixon that night became an ex-president waiting to happen. General Kelly, this country may be too far gone for one man to make a public cri de coeur, or 20 of them to make them, and for that to save the nation. But you right now are our best chance, and maybe our last chance before the election. Get up there and tell what you told Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic. Cite as many dates and details as you can. Put Trump's invoking of Hitler on the record. Tell them about Trump calling the American dead of World War I in France suckers and losers. Tell them live on CNN, on MSNBC, on CBS, ABC, NBC, live on Fox if Fox has the guts to do it. Tell them what you told my friend Michael Schmidt of the New York Times.
He commented more than once that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
So what would you say when he said to you that Hitler did a lot of good things?
Well, I tell him that. I said, if you first of all, you should never say that. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist life, philosophy, so that nothing he did you could argue was good. It was certainly not done for the right reason, and but he would occasionally say that.
By the way, the New York Times put all that below the fold of the front page, under all the horse race stories and political strategy and polling. The way the Times coincidentally buried Watergate for a year until Archie Cox held his press conference 51 years ago last Sunday. Do it, General. Alert the media, because the media is obviously no longer alert to threats, because the media has forgotten its oath, unofficial as it is, and especially because your oath, sir, to serve this nation and, if need be, to save this nation is neither unofficial nor forgotten. It is hard to believe that right now, in the rankings of nonpartisan patriotic service to this country, the ill-fated former New York Times columnist William Kristol is far, far ahead of the Times itself, and ahead of dozens of other terrified, lazy, and ultimately incompetent news outlets. Because just the headline of the column that Bill Kristol and Andrew Egger wrote for The Bulwark, Reich Track, Wrong Track, is gutsier than anything that's been in the New York Times in a decade. Because they are recognizing what has been undeniable for at least a year, almost certainly for 9 years, has been clearly true for 34 years. Trump is our Hitler. Not the 1940 Hitler, not 1938 Hitler, but 1932 Hitler. The one who, had he been stopped then, would not have destroyed Europe. The now is the last chance to prevent Hitler. That's who Trump has become. That's who Trump is today. And some of us have known this for 34 years, since late in the summer of 1990. That is when a writer named Marie Brenner published a profile of Trump and his first wife in Vanity Fair magazine. It is always useful to quote several paragraphs of this article in full. September 1990, quote, Trump appears to take aspects of his German background seriously. John Walter works for the Trump Organization, and when he visits Donald in his office, Ivana told a friend, he clicks his heels and says, Heil Hitler, possibly as a family joke. Last April, perhaps in a surge of Czech nationalism, Ivana Trump told her lawyer, Michael Kennedy, that from time to time her husband reads a book of Hitler's collected speeches, My New Order, which he keeps in a cabinet by his bed. Kennedy now guards a copy of My New Order in a closet at his office as if it were a grenade. Hitler's speeches, from his earliest days up through the phony war of 1939, reveal his extraordinary ability as a master propagandist. Did your cousin John give you the Hitler speeches? I asked Trump. Trump hesitated. Who told you that? I don't remember, I said. Actually, it was my friend Marty Davis from Paramount who gave me a copy of Mein Kampf, and he's a Jew. I did give him a book about Hitler, Marty Davis said, but it was My New Order, Hitler's speeches, not Mein Kampf. I thought he would find it interesting. I am his friend, but I'm not Jewish. Later, Trump returned to this subject. If I had these speeches, and I'm not saying that I do, I would never read them. There was another quote in that Vanity Fair article from 34 years ago, attributed to one of his attorneys. Donald, the unnamed lawyer said, is a believer in the big lie theory. If you say something again and again, people will believe you. 1990. It was all there in 1990. From I would never read these speeches to giving speeches even Bill Kristol recognizes as Hitlerian. This subject requires more time. I want to give this entire episode to it because Trump is Hitler 1932. And General Kelly has to hold that news conference because the evil of Trump and the threat he poses of reenacting all or part of the actual Nazi nightmare only here is accelerating, and the days are down to a precious few. I ask, do you remember the shock of 11 months ago? It's like living next to a bad intersection where there's a car crash every hour and being asked about one specifically from November of last year. But from November of last year, when Trump used one Hitlerian word, and the critics recognized it? And when the critics erupted, Trump's spokesman vowed that for those critics, quote, their entire existence will be crushed when Trump returns to the White House. Remember that? I will continue from that point. That's next. This is Countdown. Nearly a year ago, in a 5-day span in November, America seemed to be getting the point. Quote, Trump calls political enemies vermin, echoing dictators Hitler, Mussolini. That was a headline in the Washington Post. Quote, Trump compares political foes to vermin on Veterans Day, echoing Nazi propaganda. That was the headline in Forbes magazine. Quote, it's official. With vermin, Trump is now using straight-up Nazi talk. That was the headline in the New Republic. Trump is Hitler? Quote, those who try to make that ridiculous assertion are clearly snowflakes, and their entire existence will be crushed when Trump returns to the White House, unquote. That was the spokesman, Stephen Chung. Later that day, Chung realized, or somebody realized for him, what he had actually said. Chung insisted he had intended to say, and their sad, miserable existence will be crushed when Trump returns to the White House. And that Chung, or whoever thought that for him, thought the horrifying part of his threat was the word entire, rather than the phrase, existence will be crushed. That told us all we really needed to know. That Trump and Stephen Chung and Stephen Miller and all the others know exactly what they are saying and what it means and who they are paraphrasing. Moments after Chung's correction, Trump raised the stakes again. He sampled from another dictatorship. Jack Smith, Andrew Weissman, Lisa Monaco, the team of losers and misfits from Crew, and all the rest of the radical left zealots and thugs who have been working illegally for years to take me down will end up in a mental institution by the time my next term as president is successfully completed, unquote, Trump wrote. Forced psychiatric institutionalization was less the Nazis than it was the Soviets, but the Nazis happily gassed those they deemed mentally impaired, along with gassing everybody else. For a time after this, Trump seemed to understand that to keep spaces between his overt quotations of and imitations of and emulations of Hitler was his way to slip them past those who were looking for excuses to not believe that he was Hitler 1932. Or perhaps with his deteriorating mind, the spaces were inadvertent and simply accidentally protected him. But then something else happened. It was in September last year, 2023, in Dubuque, in Iowa, when he began to get into the Nazi obsession with blood and genetics. It's in the genes, as he said last week, and how the outsiders, the Auslanders, are poisoning our blood. He didn't call them Auslanders, of course. He called them immigrants. Quote, it's the blood of our country. What they're doing is destroying our country. Then, November 9th, 2023, inside the 1-year mark until the election, at 1:03 in the morning, quote, we are one movement, one people, one family, and one glorious nation. Sounds like he found that book that man Davis gave him, huh? Last Veterans Day, at 1:25 in the afternoon, Trump wrote, in honor of our great veterans on Veterans Day, we pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country. The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within. Minutes later at Claremont, New Hampshire, he liked that one so much he read it to the crowd on Veterans Day. Veterans, many of whom still alive, who actually fought to kill the last political strongman, who talked about the communist vermin and how he would root them out. Hitler. And now Trump was telling them about the communist vermin and how he would root them out. That was when Trump began to talk about the threat from within. Hitler had been more explicit, but not much. The enemy from within was Hitler's phrase. And by this past summer, Trump had realized that the enemy from within, or the enemy within, was far better. And he took Hitler's phrase and he made that one his own. Trump advocates for conformity and suppression of dissent. One people, one family, one glorious nation. For Hitler, it was a little bit more lyrical. One people, one realm, one leader. And then Trump moved to the sanguine imagery, migrants poisoning the blood of our country. Hitler began with the evil nonsense of pure Aryan blood and ended by killing those who did not, quote, have, unquote, it. Trump's puppeteer, Stephen Miller, has revealed plans for, quote, vast holding facilities that would function as staging centers built by the military and operated by Homeland Security, enabling, quote, Trump to unleash the vast arsenal of federal powers to implement the most spectacular migration crackdown. Hitler's view was identical. His terminology simpler. He just called them concentration camps. Stephen Miller's rapture at this idea underscores that we are not merely witnessing Trump using the latest in a decades-long list of bad advertising slogans for products that he will never deliver. He means it. They mean it. And as what John Kelly told us yesterday and the day before meant, they do not mean it just rhetorically. Quote, any activists who doubt Trump's resolve in the slightest are making a drastic error, Miller said. The immigration legal activists won't know what's happening. Then there is the question of how to make Trump's Hitlerian plans look legal. Russ Vought, the Project 2025 architect, helpfully mapped out how to turn the Department of Justice into a real-life Orwellian and Hitlerian revenge factory. You don't need a statutory change at all, he said. You need a mindset change. You need an attorney general and a White House counsel's office that don't view themselves as trying to protect the department from the president. Who was that they mentioned the other day is on the short list for Trump's attorney general? His concierge judge in Florida, Eileen Cannon? An attorney general doesn't view themselves as trying to protect the department from the president. Well, she's got that down. Russ Vought, meanwhile, is now referenced by Axios as being behind a plan to apply this same idea to the military. Quote, rigorously review all general and flag officer promotions to make sure the senior military officials line up with Trump's philosophies. In other words, John Kelly can go to hell and all the other John Kellys with him. And drip by drip, just as in Nazi Germany, the evil grows and grows slowly, but certainly. It's barely bigger than the last time you looked, but it is bigger. This was all comparatively new a year ago. Then, weeks after the outlines of Project 2025 became clear, the Washington Post first reported they were drafting plans to potentially invoke the Insurrection Act on Trump's first day in office to allow him to deploy the military against civil demonstrations. The military, General Kelly, that would be you. Go out and shoot some American civilians. The more unarmed, the better. That's your choice. Get up and speak or get out and shoot. And of course, Trump and Stephen Miller waiting for the bell to ring, quoting the New York Times, because Trump plans to scour the country for unauthorized immigrants and deport people by the millions per year. The newest version of this promise, obviously, is 15 million in total. And as I first pointed out in 2016, we really do need to remember that it's not as if non-immigrants wouldn't try to stop this. And of course, when they did try to stop it, they would go to those vast holding facilities that would function as staging centers, along with the migrants. Those vast holding facilities that are just camps, camps with concentration camps. It must also be caveated that Trump, to some degree, tried to do this in 2017 and failed. But as with January 6th, we must see it from his diseased point of view. They were not failures. Those events and January 6th, they were not failures. They were practice. And they were also practiced at erasing all the norms, exactly as Hitler did, gradually. Just last week, Bob Woodward confirmed the story of the ex-Congressman Mo Brooks, one that Jonathan Karl had written about last year, about Trump calling Brooks while Brooks was running for Senate and Trump had already endorsed him. Mo Brooks might have been Trump's wildest fascist ally in the coup attempt of January 2021, but now Trump needed a favor. 4 favors, actually. He wanted Mo Brooks to publicly call for Biden to be removed from the White House. This is in 2021. He wanted Brooks to publicly call for an immediate new election. And he wanted Brooks to publicly insist that Trump be reinstated. In short, he wanted Brooks to make demands that could easily have actually touched off a full-scale civil war overnight. Maybe the real story there was Mo Brooks declined, whereupon Trump withdrew his endorsement. Brooks lost the primary and has not been heard from since. You do not disobey the Fuhrer. Karl also wrote that the reason the same Republicans who attacked Trump after the coup all did a 180 and began making excuses for him was that Trump called Ronna McDaniel on the morning of his last day in office, January 20th, and told her that if they didn't get in line, he would be leaving the Republican Party to form his own party. So when it comes out that there were deleted tweets criticizing Trump about January 6th, yesterday it was Chris LaCivita, one of Trump's 2024 campaign managers, turned out to have been anti-Trump on January 6th, even talked about removing him from office in the last 2 weeks of the administration. No. I was just retweeting. Retweets are not endorsements. When you ask why no Republican breaks with Trump, even as he has everything about Hitler going for him except the mustache, it's because for nearly 4 years, Trump has been holding the Republican Party hostage. Do it my way, or you will be the third party, and the Trump party will be the second party. John Karl also wrote of what the House January 6th committee had found about Trump's final days, but did not put before the public. The Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy and its Chief of Staff James McConville had announced that the military would play no role in determining the outcome of the 2020 election, nor in the transition of power. And this infuriated Trump, who was busy huddling with Jeff Clark, also on that list for Attorney General that came out the other day, and other experts like Sidney Powell and the guy from Overstock.com about having the military seize the voting machines and declaring martial law. And this was the new part. Trump, quote, sent top aide Johnny McAtee to warn Pentagon leaders that Trump was irate. McEntee relayed Trump's concerns to Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller and took some notes on the conversation to pass back to the West Wing. And there is the note, torn in pieces in a Trumpian prepubescent rage, taped back together by aides, more loyal to your National Archives than to Trump. Quote, Chris Miller spoke to both of them and anticipates no more statements coming out. If another happens, he will fire them, unquote. And there it is, the 2020 Trumpian warm-up for 2025, when all the generals who are disloyal to Trump will be fired, because as John Kelly finally put on the record, the generals he wants, the generals he will get next time, will be just like Hitler's. And all those generals who are loyal to Trump will not be fired. They will be firing at you and me. There is, of course, one note in this nightmare orchestra that does not seem to be in tune with the rest of Trump as Hitler. He is specific, repetitive, almost boringly angry about his unprecedented, unmatched support of Jewish people. Until you listen carefully, when you realize it's not support of Jewish people at all. It's just another anti-Semitic trope, and it is based on the idea that Jews are loyal not to America or whatever country they live in, but to Israel. And Israel is part of something even darker within Trump's world. It is the way he has gotten America's evangelicals to side with him no matter what, because the evangelicals love Israel. Israel has to be protected, because the rapture can only happen after the evangelicals and God convert all the Jews or kill them. Now, that might as well be a Trump campaign plank. And it is another reason John Kelly has to go back to war before the microphones and cameras this time. I'll explain this darkest part of the darkness next. Quote, "No president has done more for Israel than I have. Somewhat surprisingly, however, our wonderful evangelicals are far more appreciative of this than the people of the Jewish faith, especially those living in the U.S. Those living in Israel, though, are a different story. Highest approval rating in the world, could easily be PM. U.S. Jews have to get their act together and appreciate what they have in Israel before it is too late." The first thing there, and if you didn't recognize it, that quote is from Trump. The first thing to note there is Trump's unshakable conviction. We have been hearing it since at least 2016. God knows what Ivana Trump heard. He said it again last week, that Americans of Jewish heritage are actually loyal first, or should be loyal first, to Israel. People of the Jewish faith, especially those living in Israel. This is one of the oldest tropes about that religion, that there is an implied dual citizenship, a certain uncertainty as to where Jewish loyalty really lies. All anti-Semites depend upon it. All rulers who ever purged Jews believed it. Adolf Hitler started there. In 2018, at a Hanukkah event at the White House, addressing Americans who happened to be Jewish, he referred to Israel as, quote, your country. Not the last time he said that. A year later, he said anybody who voted for a Democrat might be disloyal. This has now become, you'd better have your head examined. He asked a reporter from an Orthodox Jewish magazine, I did the Heights, I did Jerusalem, I did Iran. The Iran deal was a disaster, right? And I also did many other things. Jewish people who live in the United States don't love Israel enough. Does that make sense to you? I'm not talking about Orthodox Jews. I believe we got 25% of the Jewish vote, and it doesn't make sense. It just seems strange to me. He might as well have said, I fed them fish. Why didn't they bark like seals? Translation of that quote and of the social media post, as president, he gave Israel gifts. He was nice to them when, he could have been openly anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. I mean, what's the point of having a cabinet to keep your Hitler books in? I mean, he didn't do any nasty things to the Jews. You'd think the Jews would fawn over him for not openly persecuting them. Let me go out of sequence here and cut to the money quote. U.S. Jews have to get their act together and appreciate what they have in Israel before it is too late. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that's not subtle. It is a threat, or a threat couched as a warning. Either way, it is a repeat of the way the diseased mind of Trump works. People hate you. I helped you. You haven't been grateful enough. You're Jewish. Israel, not America, is your country. I helped Israel. If I'm not there to help Israel, you'll be sorry. So you better start supporting me more, or else. But maybe the most important part of that post is the seemingly throwaway reference to the evangelicals. It actually explains the whole goddamned thing. He says, our wonderful evangelicals. I'm sorry, these are religious nuts who will support him no matter what, because they think he is part of the most screwball Bible prophecy of all of the many screwball Bible prophecies. He thinks they are far more appreciative of his support for Israel than are American Jews. The Trumpian tell here is adding the phrase, somewhat surprisingly. This is his standard misdirection, making it seem as if he doesn't understand something. Quote, something somewhat surprisingly. That always means he understands it completely. He realizes its dark implications, and he wants to distance himself from it. He can't sell it to you. He has to hide it from you. And the obsession with Israel on the part of those wonderful evangelicals is as dark as it effing gets. And if you don't know this yet, sit your ass down. 4.5 years ago or more, Newsweek printed this remarkable headline, quote, "Trump will start the end of the world," claim evangelicals who support him. Evangelical Christians believe in end times, what they call prophecy, and what others call stuff somebody made up to fleece the gullible and stupid. Jerusalem, where Trump moved the American embassy to, is the centerpiece of this fire and brimstone ending. Let me quote some of the Newsweek piece on this. What kickstarts the end times into motion is Israel's political boundaries being reestablished to what God promised the Israelites according to the Bible. Nate Pyle, a pastor and author of a book about Jesus, told Newsweek, most evangelicals subscribe to a belief in premillennialism, the belief that the second coming of Christ will begin a 1,000-year period where Christ will rule over a peaceful and prosperous earth. Neil J. Young, a religion historian, told Newsweek. Young, who holds a Ph.D. in history from Columbia University, writes frequently on evangelical culture and politics. Israel is a key part of this story, too, as Christians believe that events there are fundamental to bringing about the end times, Young continued. Meanwhile, the evangelical belief in the end times also includes the eventual conversion to Christianity of the Jewish people. The scenario begins when Christ comes to earth to take the living Christians who believe in him to heaven and resurrect the dead who were true Christians, an event called the Rapture. Afterward, it is believed that the Antichrist will reign on earth during the 7-year period of tribulation. What about my 401k? Now, you didn't mishear anything in there. The evangelical fascination with Jerusalem is about Christ returning and converting the Jews or killing them. There is a history professor at the University of North Texas named Elizabeth Oldmixon. She studies nothing but this bizarre connection between the evangelicals and Israel, and now evangelicals and Israel and Trump. Vox interviewed her and got to the whole, convert or die thing. They believe that before Christ will return, she said, there will be a tribulation where Christ defeats evil. There will be natural disasters and wars and perhaps an antichrist, as the book of Revelation notes. Then at the end of that period, the people of the Mosaic covenant, including the Jews, will convert. Then after their conversion, the great millennium starts. The Vox reporter has seen the small problem in this timeline and quite naturally asks Professor Oldmixon, and what about the people who don't convert? What becomes of them? Oldmixon, quote, well, according to the evangelicals who believe this, they'll end up with the rest of the unsaved, which means they'll be wiped out and sent to hell. Well, there you have it. Trump's support for Israel, his easiest, most sellable defense against the charge that he is Hitler 1932, is based on his need for evangelicals to support him, and the evangelicals support Israel because later, a little later here in the timeline, it's revealed that all the Jews are to be converted or killed. So if you want to take the darkest view of that last sentence from Trump, U.S. Jews have to get their act together and appreciate what they have in Israel before it is too late. He's literally warning them about annihilation. Where have we heard this before? More importantly, how do we stop it? That wonderfully titled Bill Kristol column yesterday, Reich Track, Wrong Track, noted that to some degree the cynical and useless Governor Sununu was right, that voters are glazed over about Trump's Hitlerian tendencies and anti-democracy hints. But Kristol notes that an outfit called Blueprint tested several phrases, several political campaign phrases with focus groups, and one horrified them. And what we need right now is horrified. As Kristol wrote, what did move the needle was this message. Nearly half of Donald Trump's cabinet have refused to endorse him. When Trump learned during the Capitol riot that his supporters were threatening to kill his own vice president, he said, "So what?" and refused to do anything to assure the vice president was safe. Republican governors, senators, and House members have all said the same thing. We can't give Trump another 4 years as president. Crystal continues, as soon as the message turned from an abstract argument against Trump into an unambiguous case that Trump's own former allies were making against him, it became the single most persuasive line tested by Blueprint. It was stronger even than abortion rights and Social Security. In other words, hearing about Trump's unfitness from people who worked with him and from Republicans one would expect to defend him seems to make a difference. I think the takeaway here is pretty obvious, Crystal concludes. Voters have become inured to many shocking things about Trump, but maybe the one thing that can shake them out of that torpor is people who knew or worked with Trump stepping up to make the case from their own experience. I wonder who he means. I will also suggest in conclusion that however slowly they work, words can work. They are not the solution, but they open doors to the solution. On this podcast, starting in September 2022, I began one night by saying these words: we must face the reality that Trump is America's Hitler. We must use the real words. There are no more dog whistles. As of now, as of this weekend, as of this morning, they have begun to salute him as others saluted Hitler. They have begun to play the music and chant the slogans of QAnon. They have begun to weave in the sing-song melodies of the televangelists and the Christo-fascists. They have stopped pretending, so too must we stop pretending. America's Hitler is here. John Kelly knows this. John Kelly is now the embodiment of the Trump cabinet members who all know this, who appear in the Blueprint focus group. It is time for John Kelly to call the news conference. He and America's other real patriots, real generals, real bureaucrats, even real political operatives, they can get up there and tell what they heard and give the forces of democracy a slightly better chance on November 5th. Name names, General. And the names are Trump and Hitler. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.